Welcome to this session of PortoUX once more. This is our session of March. So just a quick disclaimer, this event will be in English. We want, on behalf of PortoUX, we want to thank you all for engaging in our events, and we hope that by doing so, we are helping to create value to your career and to careers and to your experience. This year, we will have a very busy agenda with a lot of events. So we are previewing to have events most of every month. So if you are curious, please stay tuned. Our events will be about several topics. If you want to know more about our community, please follow us on social media. The links are already in the comment section. So now I will pass to Alessandra. She will be our moderator for today, and she will explain how it works and what is this tool tasting event that we create. So on to you, Alessandra.
Okay, thank you, Marta, and welcome everyone to PortoUX tool tasting event. So let's describe the tool tasting event in one session. So this is an event that focuses on showing the main features of a specific UX design tool. We have here today a designer from Critical Tech Works. He's been designing infotainment system for BMW and Mini vehicles. And today he will talk and demonstrate some of the ProtoPie main features. Thank you, Laszlo, for accepting our invitation.
No problem.
So if you have any questions, just type it on the chat. And at the end of the session, Laszlo will answer your questions, okay? So now I'll pass the word to Laszlo.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's put this to full screen. Okay, cool. So hello and welcome to this session. My name is Laszlo, and today we'll be talking about ProtoPie and trying it out. Hope everybody's comfortable, that you've got a nice cup of tea, cup of coffee, or I don't know, a little beer or something like that. It's almost Friday. I won't judge. So why are we doing this session? Well, the design tools, just as design in general, is it's constantly evolving, and pretty much every month there's new ones getting released, old ones falling out of favor. And just as an example, back in university, I learned how to make prototypes using Flash. Which, thinking back, was a pretty big waste of time. But anyway, so the point being, it's hard to keep track of what's out there, of what's worth trying out and what's not, pretty much. So today I'd like to present to you a tool that I've been working with for the last 6 months, maybe, and I've really enjoyed playing around with it, and I absolutely think it is worth trying. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll be able to see for yourself that this is something that could be useful to you in your next project. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about what ProtoPie is, where it fits into a designer's toolkit. Then I'll give you a quick demonstration of how it works and how to set up a file. And then I have 3 examples for you to kind of showcase the more interesting, a little bit more complex, and a little bit more unique use cases that you can use this tool for. So before we do that, though, I'm just going to talk about myself for a little bit, because everybody loves doing that. So I have been a designer at Critical Tech Works for about 2 years now. And as previously mentioned, I work designing the infotainment system, particularly the media player for new BMW and Mini cars. And this has been quite a learning curve for me. Before this, I was working for a German e-commerce platform called Zalando. And designing there, it's very different because is you talk a lot about gaining user focus, about retention, about engagement, and in a car it's obviously very different. For starters, retention is not so much of a problem. If you've just bought a new BMW, you're probably going to use it more than once. But then to the issue of focus and engagement, obviously the main thing, the most important thing is that you concentrate on your driving, that you stay safe. And so to make sure that our systems comply with this, we do a lot of user testing, a lot of prototyping, and this is pretty much how I started using ProtoPie. So what is ProtoPie? As the name suggests, it is a prototyping tool. And the reason that I like it is that it's relatively straightforward. It's relatively simple to use, but you can still create quite high fidelity prototypes with it, and also test out some complex use cases. So what I'll be showing you today is having a prototype where two prototypes actually interact with each other. You can do some basic kind of testing of voice user interfaces. And you can also integrate some hardware, which obviously if you're designing in the car is quite valuable. But also if you're doing some sort of a project with IoT devices and want to prototype an app, then you can use this for that purpose. In terms of where it fits into a tool chain, this is pretty much the tools that I use. Well, not really Axure, but the first three anyway. So I design mostly in Figma, and then I also use Figma for creating basic prototypes. I think it's really quick to create a click dummy. You just kind of link a few screens. If you're using InVision or Marvel or Sketch or something like that, it's pretty much the same. And really just the speed that you can do things with, the ease of sharing this with your clients or your stakeholders, it's pretty much unbeatable. But then if you want to do something a little bit more complex, for example, I use Principle when I want to prototype something like micro interactions or also transitions between different states, between different screens. Then something like Principle I think is quite valuable because it really lets you fine tune the animations quite a lot. However, I personally wouldn't create a full prototype in Principle. I think it's a little bit too complex, especially if you're like me and you're maybe not amazing at naming all your layers. I mean, the way Principle works is pretty much you have a frame A, a frame B, and if you move a layer in between, then Principle will pretty much see that and try to fill it in with some sort of a transition, which then you can edit afterwards. But so it gets relatively complicated relatively quickly. And this is pretty much where, for me, ProtoPie comes in, where you can still do quite a complex use case. You can have a full system. I use this a lot for prototyping the media player, so it's quite good. You can play music. You can integrate things like skipping forwards, backwards. You can integrate some gestures. So yeah, this kind of thing, ProtoPie is really good for. Of course, you also have more high fidelity kind of applications. Something like Axure, where you can actually use live data, and I think it's pretty much as high fidelity as it gets, but it also comes with a lot of extra complications, and it's a little bit harder to use, in my opinion anyway, than ProtoPie. So this is pretty much it for the introduction, and I'll just show you now how the app looks and how to set up a file. So I'm going to get rid of PowerPoint. My screen is way too cluttered as always. Cool. So apologies. ProtoPie. Okay, that's for later. I'm just gonna open up a new file. Right, so if you open up a new file, it looks something like this. You have your frame in the middle. You can customize this for different sizes, for different devices. And then the way ProtoPie works, you have a three-step process pretty much every time. So you have some sort of an object. To this object, you assign a trigger or an interaction, so something that you want to do with this object, and then you can add a list of actions of how your app pretty much reacts to this input. So usually I import my designs directly from Sketch. If you do this yourself, I can always recommend to flatten your designs to rasterize pretty much all the elements that you're not going to be interacting with. That's not just for ProtoPie. I think it's quite good practice in general, and that way, yeah, it doesn't get too overwhelming, and also the file size is lighter if you want to share it with somebody else. But for this example, we're just going to draw something directly here, just a very simple rectangle. Going to give it a nice blue color because, you know, why not? And so here I have my object, and now I want to interact with this object and I want it to do something. And so for that, I can add a trigger. And you have quite a complex list of, or complete list of triggers that you can use, from very basic touch interactions, something like tapping on it or dragging, pinching, this kind of thing, all the way to things that are a little bit more complicated. For example, you can use your microphone on your phone. You can also use the accelerometers, the compass, 3D touch, if it's something that your phone supports. So really quite a lot of options that you can do there. But for now, we're just going to stick with something simple, which is tap. And what I want to happen is if I tap on this rectangle, I want it to move. So this is my trigger, it's the tap. And then these are the actions that I can do with it, and I'm just going to move it. So I'm going to move this rectangle, which is rectangle 1, and I'm going to move it by 200 pixels. Now, if you preview this, then you can already try that pretty much. So now I tap on it, it moves. Great. It's not all so interesting, so let's also change the color, let's say, so you can have pretty much an infinite list of actions assigned to one trigger. You also don't need to assign the actions to this particular element, so if you have more than one object, you can also have this trigger affect them. So I'm just going to change it to red. And you might not be able to see it so well, but you also have your little timeline here. So if you want to extend your animations, if you want to put them in a certain order, you can do that here. You also have some control over the form of animations. So you have some very basic kind of shapes of animation, which you can then customize with different movement curves. So you can actually do quite a bit, but I personally don't think this is ProtoPie's strength, so I don't use this so much. But anyway, so now we're here. So if I click on it, it moves, becomes red. So something that you might do with this is something like a toggle, like an on-off switch. Once you have something like a toggle, you can save it as a component, and you can reuse it several times within the design, so you don't actually have to go through all this process for every single toggle that you want to use. But for the toggle, we have one problem, and that is if I click on this again, it will just repeat this. So it will move again and fly off the screen, which for a toggle is fairly useless. And this is really where variables come in. So in ProtoPie, you can have these variables that you can assign for different things. And in this case, we're going to use a variable to just create an on-off state. So I'm going to add a new variable. For all scenes for this scene, it doesn't really matter. In this case, we only have the one. I'm going to call it button state. There you go. And then I can add conditions. So at the moment, by default, the variable is 0. So I can say that when the button state is 0, then it should do all these actions. So then I just have to drag it after this condition. And then after it's done all these actions, then I want to assign a new number to this variable, so number 1. And so then I didn't select the variable button state. And so now I can create a new condition and say if the button state is 1, then pretty much do all this stuff in reverse. So I can just copy it over and move this back by -200 pixels, change this back to blue. And at the end, assign the variable back to 0. And now we've made a fairly ugly, but at least it's working toggle. Right, so this is pretty much how ProtoPie works. It doesn't really matter how complex your use cases get. You're always going to have some sort of an object then trigger, and a bunch of actions that happen. So what I can do now is show you some more complex use cases. And obviously, it would have been really nice to show you some things that are related to BMW, related to my work. Unfortunately, I can't really do this for confidentiality reasons, but I do have the next best thing. So before the whole quarantine, before the lockdown, I used to go to Porto about once every couple of months. And in Porto, a thing that I always had to do every time that I'm there is to eat francesinha, because, well, they're delicious. The only issue is that after eating a francesinha, I usually feel so full that I feel that if anything touches me by accident, I'm going to explode, and I probably don't really want to eat for another week. At least that's how I feel. So to help with this very serious problem, I have come up with a prototype for what I call the francesinha. And this is what I want to show you today. So the first example is an example where we have two different prototypes interacting. So you have one prototype which will send a message and the other one which will receive it. And for this, I'm just going to connect my phone. So just give me a second. So I'm going to have one prototype on just running on ProtoPie on my desktop, and the other one on my phone, which is here. And I'm just going to share the screen over here. It's getting a bit cluttered, I understand. This one was actually not the right one. There. So imagine that I am in Porto and I want to eat a francesinha, but I don't want to eat the whole thing. So I have the send side of an app where I can choose a restaurant to which I want to go to. I can try to meet somebody new, choose a person to meet, and all I need to do now is enter an amount of time it's going to take me to get there so that the other person knows when to meet me. On the other side, you will have a person who is very impatiently waiting to eat francesinha. I'm just going to copy the code. So you can see on the other side, you have this prototype, and it's pretty much just loading. And then on this side, let me place them next to each other so you can see them well. I can just enter, okay, when will I be there? Let's say 30 minutes, and I can send. And on the other side, the other person receives it and said, okay, you can leave less than 30 minutes. And I think I can do it again if I say now 15 and share that, it will update. So this is really the first kind of feature that I think is particularly cool with ProtoPie, is that you can have several devices interacting with each other. I think the most kind of basic use case that the company themselves showcases, if you want to do something with money transfers, you can also use it to do some sort of a sharing of locations. So really quite a lot that you can do here. And you could also share with more than one prototype. So the way this works within the prototype, just going to clean up a little bit, is that on the sending side, so I have just a few layers here. I have the background. Like I said, it's good to flatten everything that you're not using. I have my call to action, or the invite to share button, and I have an input field. So for the input field, I have a trigger that if I tap on it, then I move the focus to it. That means I can start typing. When I return, then whatever my input is will be saved as a variable, and this variable, whenever I hit the CTA, will be sent to the other prototype. And then on the other side, I just have I have a loading animation which just constantly plays pretty much until it's interrupted by the receiving trigger, which will pretty much just read out whatever time I have and put it in text. So yeah, that's the kind of first use case. So what happens if I want to share the francesinha with someone? Now, there are certain occasions on which I don't want to share a francesinha and I want to have one all to myself. And that is when I'm doing the other thing that I really like doing in Porto, which is trying out some port wine. I know this is a little bit cliched, so I'm sorry for that. But still, I like doing that a lot. And sometimes after drinking a few glasses of port wine, I can't really interact with my phone so well anymore. And so I thought, hey, it would be a really cool feature for this app if you could just kind of order something by voice. And so that is the next thing I would like to show you, if I find it. It's right here. So this is ProtoPie to show you that this voice prototyping feature. So I'm just going to send it to my phone and have you share the screen again. So this voice prototyping mode, it's a beta version, so it's not always working so great. So I'm just going to try to test it out. So test. Fingers crossed. Not working so well. Test. Well, that's not so much fun, so I'm not going to do it on my phone. I'm just going to do it directly here on the preview. I think that should work fine, hopefully. Test. Cool, test. And I now realize that you can't actually hear the response, but the prototype is actually reading out whatever is written here. So now back to my very interesting use case. I'm having a few glasses of port wine. I really want a francesinha, so I can say, order me a francesinha, please. And if everything goes well, I'll say, okay, it will order me a francesinha to my location. Really nice. So the way this works is with this voice prototyping function. So you have a trigger, which is a voice command. I think PortoPie currently supports around 40 languages, so you can change this depending on what you want to do. And then you have to do a little bit of cheating, so you can pretty much include words that the device should pick up on. In this case, the keyword was order. You can put in a big list of different words that you want PortoPie to listen out for. You can also say, okay, if none of these words are heard, then you have a different response, a different trigger, and say something like this wasn't understood. And then you have a speak action, which will pretty much just read out the text that you have written here in any language. So this is also quite good if you're trying to prototype a voice interaction. I think that's not something that a lot of basic prototyping apps can do, and I think this is a really nice feature. Cool, then yeah, we're moving quite quickly, maybe a little bit too quick, doesn't really matter, but I will show you the last kind of use case. And for this, it's the hardware interaction. So back to the amazing Porto story. I've heard sometimes that some people like to drink quite a lot of port wine, and at that point, maybe you can't speak so well anymore, and maybe you can't really use the microphone feature. I'm not speaking from experience, this has never happened to me, but I hear that it's a thing. Luckily, the Francesinha app comes with a wearable device, which is going to be a wristband, and it can pretty much, if you press on it, then it will order you a francesinha. So to do that, I have this incredibly complex prototype, which is not really that complex. It's a button connected to an Arduino, and so I'm going to connect this to my phone and show you the last prototype, which is the hardware interaction. So let me just set that up. This works using an Android message. So unfortunately, this doesn't work with iPhones yet. And if you are a little bit more technically capable than I am, then you can actually also write your own plugins. So if you want this to interact with your computer or with other devices, you can actually do that. One thing that we're looking at in particular is setting up a driving simulator in the office, so we could actually have some input from steering wheels. You can do quite a lot of things that are more complex than connecting a button, which is essentially what I did. So I'm just going to test out this to see if it works, and it does. So then I will go back to the prototype. And scan the code again. Cool. So this isn't looking very good. Apologies about that. Maybe I just tried to share the screen again. Oh no, there you go. So I'm not really sure how to show this in the best way. I have my little button. I don't know how to use the voice command anymore, but it's okay because I have my little button. I can press it, and then hopefully, if everything goes well, we should get a notification, which we do not. Always the problem with live demonstrations. Apologies about that. So let me just check what is happening here. Okay. Getting the signal. Turning it off and on again always seems to work. Classic. Okay, cool, that works. Back to ProtoPie. And let's try our favorite little button again. It worked on my phone. It doesn't work on Teams. So I'll show you in the camera. Ah, there you go. Okay, so pretty much it's a lot less impressive when I show it like this, but when I press the button, it gives me a notification saying it's ordered the francesinha for me, and it will be here in 12 minutes, and I don't really have to worry about that. So yeah, this is a very, very basic use case, but of course, you can do a lot more. You do have to know how to program an Arduino a little bit, but you can send a message to ProtoPie from the Arduino, and this way you can encode things, you can encode button presses. There's a really impressive example online from the guys who made PortoPie, where they actually recreated an entire arcade game, like Space Invaders style, and made a joystick for it. And the whole thing, nothing is coded, everything is in PortoPie, and you can play this game fully. So there's really quite a lot that you can do with that. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the demonstrations that I have. So yeah, to sum up, I think this is a really cool tool. You can do some pretty complex interactions with it, and still it's relatively easy to use because you always have these three steps. You have your object, you have your trigger, and you have an action. Like in this case, for the last prototype, all I have is a receive action, and then I can close this window, the pop-up with a tap. So it's really takes about 30 seconds to set up. And I think if you're trying to prototype this kind of thing, it's a lot simpler than getting someone to actually develop it for you. And it's a lot more flexible if you want to make some changes afterwards. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laszlo, for your amazing and super useful demonstration. I believe that your prototype is pretty cool. Yeah, I think you should go ahead with this idea. Really.
Thank you very much.
I think I don't speak just for myself. I think we all miss eating francesinha in a restaurant right now. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we have some questions. I'm going to read the questions that some attendees leave on the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it, and I read it. Okay, so the first question for you is, would it be feasible to create desktop app prototypes, or is ProtoPie mobile oriented?
I think it's a little bit more biased towards mobile, but you can definitely create desktop apps in it. So if you look at some of the triggers that you do have states like hover with the mouse, and you can have key presses on your keyboard. So it's absolutely doable. Yeah, but it's probably a little bit more slanted towards phones.
Okay.
But like I said, completely doable.
Yeah. Okay. So does it works with iOS?
So most of it does. So you have this this other app that you download on your phone called ProtoPie Studio, and that's pretty much how you transfer your prototypes onto your phone. This works equally well with Android and iOS. The only thing that does not work well with iOS is this connecting hardware to it that currently is not supported.
Okay. Okay. So another question is, could you show us in detail how you prototype a voice interaction?
Sure. Yes, so I'll go back, or I don't know, maybe I set up a new file. I don't know, I'll go back to the other prototype. So what I have here is, I'll turn the opacity on everything so you can see in a second. So you have the microphone button, which has two states. It has an active and inactive state. The active state is behind it, so when I press the button, they pretty much change opacities. And when this button gets pressed, so on touch down, it activates the microphone. So this is when the prototype starts listening. It's set here to listen to English, but you have quite a long list of languages here. And so that's when it starts listening. And then it waits pretty much. You have a separate trigger, which is a voice command. So here you can set the trigger point. So you can tell it to react while the user is speaking, or wait for somebody to finish and react afterwards. And so you have these phrases that you can write in there. So in this case, I wrote order. I could have also added please, and all sorts of other things. You can also add complete sentences. And when ProtoPie hears one of these words mentioned, it will then execute pretty much all the actions that are here. So I actually have two separate ones. I have one which reacted to the word order, and I have another one here which reacted to the word test. And then you can pretty much design an animation around that. So first, I move up this little white window, and then the text, it was actually already there. So again, it's cheating a little bit, but hey, it's a prototype. And this text then appears depending on what you say. So I don't think it's actually possible to register exactly what it is that somebody said, but for prototyping, again, you can kind of fake it till you make it, basically. Yeah. And then you always have this response, which you don't need to have, but it's quite nice to have some sort of a feedback. So you can have text here. In this case, they will order me a francesinha. And you could also have a formula. So you could actually have a variable. So in this first prototype that I showed you, where I sent a certain time or a certain number, you can actually set it up in the way that it will read out this time for you. And this way it varies, and it maybe is a little bit more dynamic than the way I have it set it up now, which is, fake, pretty much.
Yeah, like you said, it's a prototype. So yeah, it's expectable to be fake. Okay, thank you, Laszlo. So the next question will be, can you export it to HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or something you can host on a server for a long term?
So in terms of exporting it, I've never actually tried. I believe the answer is no. I don't think you can export it as any type of code. However, you do have a server where you can upload the ProtoPie, and in much the same way as you can share like a prototype in Figma, you can send this link to pretty much your stakeholders, your clients, whoever, so they can try it out for themselves, either on the desktop or on their own phone.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the other question that we have is, do you have to install some kind of plugin in ProtoPie to connect to the Arduino, or it is already implemented in ProtoPie?
It's for Arduino, it's already implemented. So if you want to do some more complex things, for example, hook up a steering wheel or something like that, there are actually plugins available. So on the GitHub page for ProtoPie, there's already quite a few different plugins written, but Arduino is one of the basic use cases, and it's supported out of the box.
Okay, so actually I have just a few questions also, because I am also curious about ProtoPie. So can you name a few features that you like best in ProtoPie?
Sure. I mean, it's first of all, I really like this this trigger and action kind of a way of working. I think it's kind of a little bit less complicated than something in principle where you have to have a state A and a state B and then the transition between them. I think this works really well if you're working with 2-3 screens, but if you're prototyping a complete app, then I think this is a much easier way of doing it. Also, the fact that you can save components and you don't really have to remake these animations for every single thing that you want to be interactive. And you don't have to design for every single scenario, right? So if you have
That's
button
cool.
A, B, and C, you don't have to have a different design for what happens if you press A, what happens if you press A and B, what happens if you press B and C, which in a lot of prototyping apps is the case. So I think this is really good. And then obviously the stuff I showed, I think it's really cool that you can try out some things with voice. I think it's really cool that you can connect hardware. I think you can share this quite nicely as well. It's quite easy to get onto your phone, although that maybe isn't very exclusive to ProtoPie. But in general, what I would say is it's quite simple for what it does.
Okay, cool. Another question is, it is simple to import the layouts from Sketch, like command copy, command paste, or did you need to a plugin or something else?
No, so by default you have the options to import from Figma, from XD, and from Sketch. This does work quite well. Yeah, so it's quite smooth. But like I said, I usually edit my files a little bit beforehand to simplify them down so that I don't have 500 layers. But yeah, just the ones that I actually want to interact with.
Okay. Okay. So what are the things that you miss in this app? Is there something that you wish it to have, something that you miss?
It's a very, very good question. I haven't really thought about it. I guess what I would like is for more hardware integration. I think this is for me one of the key features, seeing as I work in an in-car environment where we do have elements on the steering wheel. We have the center stack with all sorts of different buttons on it as well, and yeah, for some elements, I think it could be a little bit easier to integrate. And I know it's doable, but I'm not a developer. I'm not particularly skilled, technically speaking. So this could be easier. Other than that, I'm actually quite happy with the feature set.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just by the way, the ProtoPie is not paying me in any way to say any of this stuff, just in case there were any debts.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be we should do it, a disclaimer for that. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Laszlo.
No problem.
Yeah, so we have also the question. So we know that we can import files from Sketch, but Tiago asked if we can import files from Adobe XD.
Yep, that was one of the options as well. So you can import files from XD as well.
Okay, so about these prototyping tools, do you feel that using them it has improved somehow the acceptance of your solutions with the stakeholders and users?
For sure. I think prototyping is incredibly important. It's something that I've been doing in one form or another since I've started working within the field of design. So at the start, I was working in this industrial design, so more with physical objects. Now it's more digital, it's more UI UX, but the principle is always the same. You're never designing for yourself. You're always designing for other people, and so you need to know how these people react to certain things. And the only way you can do that and know for sure is to test it in a prototype. Of course, you could develop it first and then test it, but that is a very long process. It's really annoying to make changes afterwards. And even now, when I do have some big changes, my developing team isn't always very happy with me. But to answer your question, it is a lot easier to convince people that it's worth making changes is if you have results from a usability study. If somebody, like, if you say, okay, this button is too small, we have to make it bigger, and then you have the data to show that, I don't know, 10 people, 20 people couldn't hit this button on the first go, then that's very powerful, and that's something that can be used to convince a lot of people.
Yeah, to improve usability for sure. Yeah, and to know what they think. I really agree on that. Yeah, I believe that we have no more comments. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to thank you, Laszlo, for your presentation once again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want just to thank you all for attending this session. I want to say just a little thing. So I will leave a link in the chat. It's to a form, because the purpose of this form is to find out which tools you want to see in the next tool tasting event. So please send us your opinion, okay? And we make it happen. Let me put there on the chat. And from my side, we hope that you find it useful for your career. And thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, Laszlo, for your availability and your clear explanation about ProtoPie. So I will try it for sure. It's quite interesting and it seems very useful when I return to develop some apps, maybe. So, and once again, thank you for attending to this session, and stay tuned because we will have in the next months we'll have a session about microcopy, and it's quite interesting. So please follow us in social media and stay tuned. And once more, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.